billionaire father. A silent boy. For 8 long years, not even money could buy back his son's voice. Until a barefoot girl from the street did what science never could. What she pulled from his ear changed everything. Not just sound, but truth itself. "I swear I can make you hear," the barefoot girl whispered, her voice trembling like the ripples in the fountain behind her. The courtyard of Grant Industries shimmered beneath the afternoon sun, marble floors gleaming like the skin of a giant pearl. The air smelled of money, sharp and cold, the kind that silences people more effectively than fear. Suited employees hurried past, murmuring into headsets, their reflections dancing in the glass walls of the empire. Lucas Grant, founder and CEO, walked briskly across the courtyard, his phone pressed to his ear, barking orders that echoed faintly off the marble. He didn't notice the boy sitting quietly on the bench near the fountain. His own son, Oliver, small and solemn, his gaze fixed on the play of sunlight in the water. Deaf since he was 2, Oliver lived in a world without sound. Even his father's voice existed only as a vibration, a ghost of what could never be. And then she appeared, a girl, maybe 12, barefoot and thin as a whisper, clutching a tray of wilted flowers and carved wooden trinkets. Laya. Her clothes hung loosely, patched and threadbare, and her eyes wide wild, ancient, swept over the marble expanse like she didn't belong but refused to leave. Security usually chased her away, but fate, it seemed, had called a truce. Laya paused by the fountain, her gaze locking with Oliver's. His eyes were silent and lonely. Hers were alive with something strange, knowing. She raised a trembling hand and signed, "Hello." Oliver blinked, startled. Someone was speaking his language, not with sound, but with meaning. Slowly, shyly, he signed back, "Hello," then he winced. His small hand went to his ear. "Itches," he signed. Laya frowned. Kneeling in front of him, she said softly, "Hold still." Before fear could stop him, her slender fingers moved carefully, gently, into his ear. For a moment, nothing, and then she pulled out something small and black. It writhed briefly in her palm. Something alive. And then it was gone. Oliver gasped, and the world cracked open. The sharp blare of a car horn tore through the courtyard, raw and deafening. He clutched his ears, eyes wide in shock. A sound, a real sound, had pierced his silence. Then came another, his own voice. "Ah!" he cried, the sound rough and unsteady. But there. Laya froze, her eyes filled with tears. "You heard that?" She whispered. For the first time in 8 years, the world spoke to Oliver again. Water splashed, wind stirred leaves, a pigeon cooed on the ledge, and amid it all, his heart pounded like thunder. "Dad!" He shouted. The word was broken, trembling, but real. Lucas stopped mid-sentence. The phone slid from his hand. He turned, disbelief rippling through him as his son's voice echoed through the marble courtyard. "Dad!" Time stopped. The fountain seemed to hang mid-arc. Employees froze, watching the miracle unfold. Then came rage. Lucas lunged forward, grabbing Oliver's arm and pulling him back. "Get away from him!" He barked at Laya. "Security!" The command shattered the air. But before the guards could move, Oliver shouted again, hoarse but loud, "Don't hurt her." Lucas froze. The sound of his son's voice, his voice, hit him harder than any blow. 10 years of silence, 10 years of failed treatments and hollow promises. And now, a barefoot stranger had done the impossible. Hours later at the hospital, chaos took over. White coats, blinking monitors, polished voices. Lucas stood behind the glass as doctors examined Oliver, their faces unreadable. His hands shook, not with fear, but guilt. The lead specialist entered. "Remarkable case, Mr. Grant. The obstruction appears to have been removed. Temporary recovery is possible." "Temporary?" Lucas snapped. "A girl off the street did what you couldn't in 8 years and you call it temporary?" The doctor cleared his throat. "We followed all medical protocols." "Protocols?" Lucas muttered bitterly. "You took my money, promised miracles, and never even looked inside his ear." Laya, standing silently in the corner, stepped forward. "They didn't look because they didn't care," she said, her voice cutting through the sterile air. "They saw your name, your money, not your son." The doctor stiffened but said nothing. Instead, he slid a folder across the table. "You should see this." Inside were Oliver's medical records, stamped, Signed, approved. Pages of reports declaring his condition irreversible. Then Lucas saw the final line. Maintain diagnosis to preserve long-term funding. Grant account approved. The words blurred through his tears. His knees went weak. They had kept his son sick. Turned his silence into a steady income stream. Lucas's fists clenched until his knuckles went white. "You monsters," he whispered. "You sold my son's silence." He tore the papers apart. The ripping sound echoed through the sterile room like thunder. Laya stepped closer, her eyes bright with something fierce and unbreakable. "Now you see," she murmured. "Sometimes truth doesn't come from power." Lucas looked at her, this barefoot girl who had walked through his empire of glass and arrogance. And for the first time in years, he truly heard. For the first time in his life, Lucas Grant, billionaire, innovator, man of reason, was learning what true deafness felt like. The kind that didn't come from the ears, but from a heart that had forgotten how to listen. The hospital corridor was too bright, too clean for what lived inside him. Every light felt like a blade, every beep of the monitors a cruel reminder of all the years he had paid others to care for his son so he didn't have to face the silence himself. The truth throbbed in his chest like a siren that wouldn't stop. They had bought his son's silence. Not nature, not fate. People. People who smiled from behind polished desks, who used words like care, treatment plan, and long-term funding. And he, Lucas Grant, the man who built empires, had signed every single one of their papers. Now he sat beside Oliver's hospital bed, his hands trembling, clasped tightly together. The boy lay awake, tracing the faint pulse on his father's wrist as if he could feel sound through touch. His eyes, large and searching, reflected both fear and wonder at this new, noisy world he'd been thrown into. "You're safe," Lucas whispered, though his voice cracked like broken glass. "I promise I'll fix this." Oliver turned his head, lips trembling. He hesitated, his throat working as if learning to move again. Then softly, unsteadily, where he said, "Not your fault." The words were fragile, uneven, but they hit Lucas harder than anything he'd ever heard. His throat tightened. For years, he'd believed love could be measured in money, in machines, in endless consultations with experts who spoke in graphs and metrics. He'd thrown fortune after fortune into a void, trying to buy what only presence could give. And now, in the quiet hum of a hospital room, he saw the cost. Not just the silence of his son, but the silence inside himself. Behind him, Laya stood near the door, her small hand still stained faintly with dried blood, a reminder of the strange, impossible thing she had done. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her stillness said everything. Lucas turned to her, voice hoarse. How did you even know? What made you look?" Laya met his eyes, her expression soft but unflinching. "Because I actually saw him," she said. Everyone else looked at the money. I looked at the boy. Her words cut through him like a blade, sharp, clean, and true. Lucas exhaled, defeated. "You're just a kid," he murmured, shaking his head. "How do you talk like you've lived 100 years? Laya shrugged, her gaze steady. "Because on the streets you hear everything no one else listens to." The room fell silent. Only the soft rhythm of Oliver's breathing filled the space. And for the first time, Lucas understood that silence wasn't emptiness. It was listening. It was grace. He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from his son's forehead. "I've been deaf too," he whispered, "just in a different way." Later that night, the city lights blinked faintly through the hospital window, reflections rippling across the sterile floor. Lucas stayed awake, watching Oliver sleep. He wasn't thinking about investors or patents or public image. He was thinking about promises. When dawn came, soft and gray, he made one. Not to his company, not to his shareholders, but to the boy who had once lived in silence, and to the barefoot girl who had shattered it. He would tear down every system that profited from pain. He would stop paying for hope and start fighting for truth, because now he knew. Money could build empires, but only love could break silence. By morning, the rain had stopped, but the world outside still felt heavy. Lucas walked through the sliding glass doors of the hospital, the cold air biting his skin like guilt made visible. Oliver clung to his father's sleeve, trembling every time a siren wailed in the distance. Sound was still new to him, raw, terrifying, alive. Inside the car, quiet settled again, softer this time. Lucas stared at his reflection in the tinted glass. A man who had everything, and yet failed at the one thing that mattered. Across from him, Laya sat silently, her hands folded in her lap, faint scars on her palms catching the morning light. He wanted to thank her, to tell her what her courage had done. But words felt too small compared to the miracle she'd given him. When they reached home, Oliver refused to leave her side. He followed her everywhere, to the kitchen, the garden, the steps outside where she sat watching the evening sky. She didn't treat him like a patient or a symbol, but like a boy who was finally alive again. Lucas watched them from the hallway, awe and shame twisting inside him. That evening, as the house sank into the amber glow of sunset, he found Laya standing by the window, her reflection framed against the skyline of the city that had forgotten her. "Why did you help him?" he asked quietly. "You didn't even know us." Laya's voice was steady, her eyes shimmering. "Because no one else would." Lucas said nothing. The silence that followed wasn't cold or empty. It was full of everything he had missed all those years. And for the first time, Lucas Grant didn't just hear the world. He listened. "She helped my brother," Laya said quietly. "He went deaf after an infection. The clinic turned us away because we couldn't pay." Her voice was steady, but her eyes shimmered with a pain that had never fully healed. "I know what it feels like when the world decides your pain isn't profitable." The words hit harder than any accusation. Lucas swallowed, his chest tightening. For years he had signed documents without reading the fine print, convinced that money could buy compassion. But now, standing in that hospital room beside the girl who had nothing, he realized the truth. Compassion wasn't for sale. "Then help me make this right," he said finally. "Not with money. With truth." Laya turned toward him. The hardness in her eyes softened, replaced by something quiet and resolute. "Start by listening to him," she whispered. "He's been waiting for that longer than you think." That night, Lucas knelt beside his son's bed. The hum of the hospital machines faded into the background as Oliver lay awake, tracing shapes in the air with his fingers, invisible words, fragments of a language his father was only now beginning to learn. "What do you hear?" Lucas asked softly. Oliver smiled faintly, his voice still uncertain, but full of wonder. "Everything." Lucas's throat tightened. He leaned forward, gathering the boy into his arms. "Then you'll never have to hear silence again," he murmured. "Not while I'm still breathing." Outside, the wind stirred through the city, carrying the scent of rain and streetlights. Laya stood at the hospital's edge, her small frame silhouetted against the glow of the skyline. For a long moment, she watched the father and son through the glass. Then she turned, stepping into the night, her bare feet silent against the wet pavement, her shadow fading like a prayer carried by the air. Lucas watched her go, realizing that the girl who had come from nothing had given him everything that mattered. A reason to finally listen. To fight, and to live like a man who could hear. Days later, the story had spread. Headlines called it "The Miracle at Grant Industries." News anchors whispered about divine intervention, about science and faith colliding in one unexplainable moment. But for Lucas, there was nothing miraculous about it. There was only revelation and responsibility. He stood once more outside the hospital that had taken so much and returned so little. The same place where he had once signed checks instead of asking questions. Now he was signing something else, a legal order, demanding a full investigation into the medical network that had profited from his son's silence. The men in suits tried to reason with him, their words slick with apology. "Mr. Grant, this could damage your reputation." Lucas didn't flinch. His voice was calm but sharp as glass. "You silenced my boy for profit. Now I'll make sure the world hears the truth." There was no thunder in his tone, no grand fury, only conviction. The kind that doesn't shout, but resonates. Nearby, Oliver sat on a bench, sketching in a notepad. His laughter rang out suddenly, awkward, uneven, but alive. Every sound he made was a rebellion, a declaration that the silence had lost. And somewhere in the distance, Laya walked through the morning mist, her bare feet leaving faint prints on the wet ground. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Her purpose was already fulfilled. Lucas turned his gaze toward her fading figure. "You gave me back my son," he said quietly, though she couldn't hear him now. How do I thank you? But Laya's voice, soft and steady, echoed in his memory. You don't owe me anything. Mr. Grant, just promise you'll keep listening. To him, and to the people no one else hears. He watched her disappear into the blur of dawn, her shadow stretching long across the light like a bridge between two worlds. The world of power he had built, and the world of humanity she had reminded him of. As the first rays of sun touched the skyline, Lucas understood something he never had before. Wealth could build towers, but only compassion could build bridges. He had spent his life chasing power only to learn that the most powerful thing he could ever do was listen. Sometimes we think hearing means using our ears. But real listening, the kind that changes lives, begins with the heart. When we choose to see beyond titles, beyond money and pride, we rediscover what it means to be human. A single act of empathy can awaken truth, heal wounds, and give someone back their voice. And in the soft light of that new morning, Lucas Grant finally understood. The richest people are not the ones who own the world, but the ones who finally learn how to hear it. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more cinematic stories that remind us, sometimes, the richest people are the ones who finally learn to listen. Your support helps us bring more voices, more emotions, and more truths to life. So stay connected, keep feeling, and never stop listening.